Michele Braniff, Green Party of Canada candidate in Cambridge. I live in the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Attawapiskat, and the Neutral people. This is land that is part of the Haldimand Tract. At the time of the American Revolution, the ancestors of the Six Nations fought with the British, and they came from New York, and Haldimand gave them the land from the source of the Grand River, 6 miles on each side to Lake Erie. And this is acres and acres, and the Six Nations Reserve is very small, and there's not much of that land left. Before that, the land was the land of the Mississauga of the Credit. So we do a land acknowledgement, and it's the truth part of truth and reconciliation. But now is the time that we need to start moving towards reconciliation. There are calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Report. The report of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls has recommendations. Had we followed recommendations of the Royal Commissions from 20 or 30 years ago, we would have had a lot of that work done. In other words, as treaty people, there are promises that were made and commitments to be followed. And the settler people have a lot of work to do. The indigenous people of these lands looked after these lands for thousands and thousands of years. They understood sustainability, they understood the lands, and they had a deep and spiritual relationship with place. And in this time of climate crisis, there's a lot that we could learn as treaty people. Um, the benefit is actual mutual. It's not only about a debt that needs to be paid, but in fact a relationship that can be enriched and which will benefit both sides of the treaty people. So in terms of some of the things we could do, it's true the Liberal government has built a lot of infrastructure with respect to water and solving the boil water crisis. However, there's many more reserves who still are under 20-year boil water advisories. And in fact, if we go really close to home to Six Nations, they have a brand new water system. They technically aren't very often under boil water advisories, but yet 89% of the homes are boiling water, and that's because there's a problem with the water lines. So the treatment plant alone is not enough. There are other reserves where the challenge is the training on water management, or perhaps they have some of the infrastructure and some of the training, but not the annual budget. So the reality is, in terms of water and in terms of many other kinds of infrastructure, the 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 funding formula for people who live on reserves is much less per capita than the funding formula with municipalities. Municipalities have laws governing the purity of water, their guidelines when it comes to reserves. So we need to have the same financial infrastructure, monies available, the same laws, the same responsibilities for municipalities as on reserves. This applies to education as well. First Nations education is per capita in Ontario, Cambridge is Ontario, is much less per student, and that doesn't even include things like computers. So the Green Party, in addition to a commitment to to respond to the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations, to put action plans again in consultation with Indigenous people, has an idea of having a Council of Canadian Governments. And this is democratic reform. It's long overdue. In my view, it's brilliant, because what it does is this: the Senate has been much criticized. So you have a Canadian Council, uh, uh, Canadian Council of Governments, and it has federal, provincial, municipal, and Indigenous leaders. And so, and then we also have increased funding for municipalities, where there's a lot of responsibility to look after people, and also for the Indigenous reserves, so that this is a way to have equity. We don't want to completely get rid of the Indian Act. Racist name, racist history, but there's a lot of Canadian Supreme Court of Canada cases that recognize that nation-to-nation relationship. Um, so, so the legislation has enough positive history that it's part of our relationship as treaty people, and there are some benefits. But the financial arrangement underneath that legislation um, could be revamped with something like the Canadian Council of Governments. It would also give us the advantage of having a branch of government which is able to coordinate and have within it uh, the negotiators for federal, provincial, municipal, Indigenous relationships. All four players represented together. Just imagine the wonderful future that we could have. And this is all part of the Green Recovery Plan.